Hey guys, tonight we drift back a few thousand years to a place where the air smells faintly of baked mud brick and the sweet rot of river reeds. You're standing at the edge of Thebes, the sun tilting low and wide across the horizon, turning the Nile into a sheet of molten gold. Behind you, a donkey brays lazily, and ahead, just past the rows of papyrus stalls and spice merchants, you spot something peculiar on a blanket laid out in the dust. A smooth slab of wood, marked with faint squares. Tiny carved pieces sit neatly on top. At first glance, it's almost disappointing, like a checkerboard that forgot to try hard, but something about it catches you. You squat down, running your fingers over the grooves. They're not deep, just enough to hold a row of game pieces in place. The vendor, a man whose beard is equal parts elegance and neglect, gives you a toothy smile. He gestures for you to pick up a piece, small, conical, cool to the touch. This, he insists, is a game board from the royal workshops themselves. You probably won't survive here long enough to learn all the rules. Between the sun, the river fevers, and the fact that fresh drinking water is basically a political commodity, but for now, your curiosity is a free pass. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're in the mood, drop your location and the local time in the comments. I love seeing the map of where you all are listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The marketplace hums in that way only ancient cities can. The smell of coriander and fresh bread mixing with the tang of copper and sheep's wool. Voices rise and fall in a sing-song rhythm as trades happen without a single coin, because here, goods are mostly swapped for other goods. You edge past a seller of blue glazed faience beads, then nearly bump into a basket of live ducks, one of which eyes you with a judgmental stare that says, "City folk." You wander deeper in, and there it is again, another board, this time on a stone bench where two older men lean in, brows knitted. They don't look up as you approach. Their hands flick over the squares, moving ivory-tipped pieces in a slow, deliberate dance. One of them tosses a handful of narrow sticks, like popsicle sticks without the popsicle, onto the bench, studies how they land, and then grins. A point scored, apparently. It's hot, the kind of dry heat that bakes you from the inside, and you find yourself drawn to the shadowed side streets. You pass a potter's workshop, the rhythmic slap of wet clay echoing like a metronome, and a group of children darting past, one clutching what looks like a miniature version of the same board you saw earlier. They're not playing just yet. Maybe they're taking it home to an older sibling who knows the rules. Historians still argue whether these early boards were purely for fun or if they began as ritual tools. Some say Senet, one of the earliest games you'll come to know, was a spiritual rehearsal for the afterlife, each move a symbolic step through the underworld. Others think that's giving too much credit to people who probably just like passing time between floods. You pause at the edge of a courtyard, where a woman is setting out jars of barley beer for fermenting. The yeast smell drifts around like an invisible invitation. Nearby, her husband is smoothing the surface of a newly made game board, rubbing fine sand over it like a craftsman polishing a jewel. He catches your gaze and nods toward the piece, as if to say, "This is our little luxury. Bread to feed the belly, games to feed the mind." One thing you notice, the boards are portable, but not exactly light. The more elaborate ones, with their inlaid squares of ivory and lapis lazuli, would have been too precious to risk losing in a street brawl or to the muddy banks of the Nile. Those stayed indoors, in shaded rooms with reed mats, maybe beside a dish of figs and a jug of pomegranate wine. But here's the quirky bit. Some of the cheaper boards were just scratched into stone steps or roof tiles, permanent, public, and slightly uneven. You imagine two friends arguing over a move, while the rest of the neighborhood steps over them, tossing in commentary the way modern sports fans do, except instead of yelling "offside," they're debating whether a throw of 4 sticks means 2 spaces or 3. A breeze off the river cools your neck, bringing with it the faint slap of water against moored boats. You follow it, leaving the hum of the market behind, and step onto the embankment. From here, Thebes stretches behind you like a living tapestry, walls painted in ochre, palm fronds swaying, and here and there the glints of polished game pieces catching the last of the day's sun. It's strange, the things people choose to carry through the centuries. The way laughter over a game can sit in the air just as long as the smell of baking bread. You lean on the stone ledge, watching a group of boys play on the riverbank. Their board is scratched directly into the mud, the pieces just sun-bleached pebbles. One of them tosses his sticks. They scatter in a clumsy pile, and he groans. Some things apparently don't change. As the first stars prick the velvet sky, you realize you've only just begun to see how deeply these games are woven into Egyptian life, how they mirror the rhythms of the river, the market, and the long, slow evenings when the world shrinks to the size of a board and its pieces. And standing here, caught between the past and the darkening present, you feel ready to follow the game's trail wherever it leads next.
The Nile is breathing tonight. You can hear it in the soft lap of water against the mooring posts, in the rustle of papyrus leaves swaying just enough to whisper. You drift alongside it, your sandals scuffing the packed earth path that runs parallel to the shore. Every step is cushioned by fine silt, a gift from the river itself, though you're quickly learning that nothing here is truly free. This river is the reason you're seeing game boards in the first place. Without it, Thebes would be a patch of scorched sand with more beetles than people. But the Nile, with its yearly floods, turns the valley into one long green invitation to settle down. It dictates when people work, when they rest, and, most importantly for you tonight, when they play. See, during the growing season, everyone's hands are busy, planting, tending, building levees. But when the floodwaters rise and fields disappear under a shimmering sheet of water, the rhythm changes. Work slows, time stretches. People gather in shaded courtyards, in market squares, or right here by the riverbank, and they pull out their boards. You can almost hear the clack of game pieces mixing with the croak of frogs. You pass a fishing boat tied to a bent acacia tree, its crew lounging on deck. One man is sprawled on a pile of nets, the other leaning over a small game board propped on an overturned basket. They toss short sticks. 4 land flat side up, one with its rounded side exposed. The player grins, moves a little cone 2 spaces forward, and the boat rocks gently beneath them. You can tell they've played this match 100 times before. Historians still argue whether the inspiration for these games came directly from the patterns of the Nile's flood and retreat. Some suggest the segmented squares on the boards mirror agricultural plots, the way each small parcel must be navigated in a certain order to ensure a good harvest. Others dismiss the idea as romantic nonsense, insisting it's just a board, no deeper meaning than rolling a die in a tavern. You prefer to think it's somewhere in between, because people have always found ways to slip a bit of the world around them into their play. The river's role as a social glue is obvious the longer you follow it. You spot 2 women balancing water jars on their heads, pausing mid-path to lean over a scratched-in board on the embankment. Their laughter carries across the water. A boy, maybe 8 years old, hovers beside them, clearly itching to play. He's holding something small, a polished piece of hippo ivory shaped into a tiny pawn. Likely it's the one good piece from a set that's otherwise been replaced with stones and nutshells. The Nile is also a highway. You notice it when a long, narrow cargo boat drifts past, loaded with baskets of onions and garlic bound for Memphis. You imagine the crew's evenings, tying up at a port, trading vegetables for beer or bread, then pulling out a travel-sized board to settle grudges from the day. I suspect these games traveled the length of Egypt this way, hopping from one village to the next like seeds scattered on the current. A quirky tidbit? Some ancient graffiti suggest people occasionally carved boards right into the decks of boats, which seems like a questionable choice given wood's value here. But maybe that was the point. If you're stuck on a ship for weeks, you make sure entertainment is literally built in. I picture two sailors arguing over a move as the deck tilts under a sudden gust, both of them pretending the roll of the sticks was totally legit. You stop near a reed thicket where the air feels cooler. The moon's reflection shivers in the dark water. Behind you, someone is plucking at a lute instrument, its soft notes mingling with the night chorus of crickets. Somewhere deeper in the city, a potter's kiln lets out a faint pop. It strikes you how much the Nile dictates not just survival, but mood. In flood season, you can feel the looseness in people's voices, the way they linger over moves on the board. In lean times, maybe the games are sharper, quicker, the stakes a little higher, even if it's only a bet for a jar of dates. The water's behavior seeps into human behavior, and by extension, into the rhythm of play. You kneel at the edge of the bank, touching the surface with your fingertips. It's warmer than you expect, like it's been holding on to the day's heat. If you lived here, you'd probably get used to this, the way the river becomes both a clock and a calendar, marking the seasons not just with crops, but with games. And maybe on nights like this, you'd sit on a woven mat with friends, board between you, letting the current's steady pull set the pace of your match. From somewhere downstream, a burst of laughter carries over the water. You imagine a group of fishermen finishing their game, the winner crowing like he's just conquered a kingdom. The sound fades into the hum of insects, into the slow, endless breath of the Nile. And you keep walking, the game pieces rattling faintly in your imagination, the boards glowing faintly in the lamplight of riverside homes. Every step along this water feels like a move on a much larger board, one where the river is both player and prize.
You hear the steady tap, scrape, tap before you see them. A little workshop tucked between two mud brick homes, the doorway open to the warm air. Inside, an artisan sits cross-legged, his shoulders bare and dusted with fine shavings. He's bent over a plank of tamarisk wood, each stroke of his copper chisel shaving off the tiniest curl. The smell hits you first. Sun-dried wood warmed by his own body heat, a faint tang of oil from a small jar at his side. This is where the boards are born. You lean in, careful not to block the thin strip of daylight spilling across his work. The plank is nearly the length of your forearm, and it already has a faint grid scratched into it. He's working with deliberate slowness, not because he has to, he's clearly done this before, but because each groove needs to feel right under the fingertip. That's the secret here. These games are as much about touch as sight. Beside him, you notice an unfinished board made from limestone. The squares are shallow but crisp, the pale stone flecked with tiny fossils. You imagine a player running their hand over it during a tense match, grounding themselves in the cool smoothness before making their move.
In another corner, a third board is inlaid with faience tiles. They're blue, so bright they look like drops of the Nile captured in mid-flow. Historians still argue whether game boards were made primarily by specialized artisans or by whoever had the tools and patience to craft one. Some point to workshops like this, dedicated, methodical, producing pieces for temples and noble households as proof of a trade. Others note the abundance of rough, homemade boards found scratched into floors and rooftops, suggesting that in some households, game-making was a family affair. You suspect both are true. People will always find a way to make a game if they want one badly enough. The artisan gestures you inside. He hands you a small carving knife, the handle smoothed by years of use, and points to a scrap of cedar. You tentatively score a line into the wood, feeling the resistance, then the sudden give. It's satisfying in a quiet way, like slicing through the crust of fresh bread. He nods approvingly, though it's hard to tell if it's genuine praise or just politeness to a tourist from the future. You glance at a shelf lined with jars of pigment, ochre red, soot black, chalk white. The artisan picks up a thin reed brush and dots a square with red, then another with black. This isn't purely decorative. It's a way of marking key points on the board, the safe or danger squares, depending on which set of rules a player follows. The trouble is, there isn't one standard set. You can already hear the arguments brewing across millennia. In a shallow basket, a collection of game pieces rests like a pile of tiny treasures. Ivory cones, polished pebbles, small discs carved from hippo bone. One oddball stands out, a piece shaped like a tiny falcon, wings tucked tight. The artisan notices your interest and chuckles. He explains that some players believe animal-shaped pieces bring luck, while others think they're distracting. A quirky superstition, but it makes sense. If you're gambling a jar of honey on the outcome, you want every edge you can get. You step back to watch him work again. His hands move with the same rhythm as the river outside, steady, unhurried, ancient. You realize that this board he's making could easily outlast him. In fact, somewhere in a museum in your own time, there's probably a board just like it, still holding the marks of a craftsman's chisel from 4,000 years ago. The street outside hums faintly, but in here, the only sounds are the scrape of the chisel, the whisper of reed brush on wood, and the occasional murmur as the artisan tests a groove with his fingertip. You find yourself slowing down, matching his pace without even meaning to. When he finishes a row, he sets the board in the sun to dry the painted squares. The light makes the colors come alive, the blue faience inlay almost glowing. You can imagine a player's opponent getting momentarily distracted by that shimmer and missing the best move. Games are psychological warfare, after all, gentle, smiling warfare. The artisan offers you a seat on a low stool. He pulls out a worn cloth bag and shakes it. Inside is a full set of throw sticks. He tosses them on the board. 3 land flat side up, 2 rounded. He moves a piece, explains something you can't fully catch, and gestures for you to try. You throw them, they clatter across the squares, and though you have no idea whether you've done well, you can't help but smile. A thin cat appears in the doorway, tail flicking, eyes on the artisan's lunch. He ignores it, too absorbed in sanding the edge of the board. You can tell this is more than a job for him. It's a craft, maybe even a calling. And in a place where days are shaped by the rise and fall of the Nile, a calling that helps fill the spaces between work and harvest is as vital as any other trade. When you leave, the smell of fresh cut wood follows you into the sunlight. You carry it with you like a bookmark, a reminder that every game begins not with a roll of the sticks, but with the quiet labor of hands that know exactly where each square belongs.
You're standing in the shade of a colonnade now, the sandstone cool against your back. Before you, on a low table carved with lotus motifs, lies the board that has been haunting your curiosity since you first arrived, Senet. The sun catches the faint sheen of its polished surface, each of its 30 squares lined up in neat rows, like a tiny highway for the soul. It's deceptively simple, 3 rows of 10, but every square seems to hold its own personality. Some are marked with symbols you can't quite decipher, a pair of crossed lines here, a tiny bird there. The pieces, 12 in total, are split evenly between 2 colors, often ivory and ebony, although some sets use blue faience and red jasper. You pick one up. It's heavier than you expect. Its base worn slightly smooth from decades, maybe centuries, of fingers moving it back and forth. The rules? Well, that depends on who you ask. Historians still argue whether Senet was mostly a race game where pieces move along the track based on the throw of sticks or knuckle bones, or a symbolic journey representing the soul's passage through the afterlife. The truth is probably both, depending on the setting. In a temple, it might be a ritual rehearsal for judgment before Osiris. In a tavern, it's just something to pass the time while the beer ferments. A scribe sits across from you, his coal-lined eyes scanning your face for signs of recognition. He explains that certain squares are safe havens, places where your piece can rest without fear of being sent backward. Others are traps. Land there, and you're sent tumbling toward the start, much to your opponent's amusement. You roll the sticks, 3 land flat, 2 rounded, and he nods as you move one of your ivory cones forward. Halfway down the board, he points to a square marked with a hieroglyph for House of Water. Land there, and your piece is washed away, forced back to earlier squares. It's a reminder, he says, of the unpredictable nature of the Nile. A good harvest one year, a disaster the next. A lucky throw tonight, a crushing loss tomorrow. Then there's the quirky bit. Some ancient boards show a slightly different track, the final squares forming a zigzag instead of a straight line. Was it a regional variation, a personal quirk of the maker, or maybe just an attempt to keep the game interesting after too many predictable endings? No one's sure. Players likely argued about this back then, just as modern gamers bicker over house rules. As you settle into the rhythm, throw, move, hope, you notice the subtle psychology at play. The scribe's eyes linger a fraction longer on certain pieces, his fingers tapping lightly when he wants you to think he's impatient. He smirks when you make a questionable move, although you suspect it's more theater than truth. Senet isn't just about luck, it's about reading your opponent, about leaning into their overconfidence or lulling them into carelessness. A breeze from the courtyard lifts the scent of lotus blossoms into the colonnade. In the distance, you hear the metallic ring of a smith's hammer, and somewhere closer, a goat bleats, as if personally offended by your last move. You glance up at the painted ceiling beams, palm fronds, and geometric borders, and think how easy it would be to spend hours here, the rest of the world shrinking to these 30 squares. The scribe leans forward, landing on one of your pieces and sending it back toward the start. He grins, and you can almost hear him thinking, better luck in the next life. You laugh, though there's a sting to it. The game teaches humility quickly. You're reminded of a passage you once read about the game being found in royal tombs, tucked beside the mummified dead, as though Osiris himself might pull up a stool and ask for a match. Some scholars believe Senet began as a simple diversion and only later took on its religious weight, evolving over centuries as the Egyptians wove more of their spiritual beliefs into everyday objects. Others insist it was sacred from the start, a ritual disguised as entertainment. The truth, as always, probably lies in the blurred space between. You play until the last piece reaches the final square, the House of Happiness. It feels oddly satisfying, like the game itself just patted you on the shoulder and sent you on your way. The scribe nods once, the faintest acknowledgement that you've passed some kind of test. As you step away from the colonnade, the board's neat rows linger in your mind. 30 squares, a handful of pieces, and a set of rules that can shift like the Nile's current, and yet for thousands of years it's been enough to keep people gathered in the shade, forgetting for a while about the heat, the taxes, and the next flood. You find yourself standing at the edge of a temple courtyard, its columns towering like a petrified forest, the painted reliefs still holding on to flecks of red and blue. The air smells faintly of incense and something sharper, burnt resin, perhaps. A priest in a crisp linen kilt moves deliberately across the flagstones, carrying a small tray. On it, you notice, sits a modest Senet board. Here, the game takes on an entirely different energy. No idle chatter, no playful wagers, just the solemn quiet of ritual. The board is set on an altar-like stand, a jar of perfumed oil at one corner, a small dish of dried lotus petals at the other. You feel almost intrusive, like you've wandered into someone else's conversation with the gods. Historians still argue whether these temple games were actual matches played between priests or symbolic enactments meant only for the gods' benefit. Some evidence suggests the moves might have been predetermined, following a script that mirrored a soul's journey through the Duat, the Egyptian underworld. Each square represented a trial, each safe space a divine blessing, each setback a reminder of chaos waiting at the edges of order. The priest kneels, murmuring words you can't quite make out, and tosses the throw sticks. They clatter onto the board, one flipping end over end before landing with its rounded side up. He moves a carved piece, shaped like a tiny scarab, its shell polished to a mirror sheen. The movement is deliberate, almost reverent. You get the sense this is less about winning and more about demonstrating the proper passage through the game's labyrinth. A second priest joins him, holding a palm leaf fan that sways gently with each flick of his wrist. The air it stirs feels cooler, carrying with it the faint scent of myrrh from the temple's inner sanctuary. You imagine this is how they keep the gods comfortable during their play, a little hospitality for deities who, after all, hold the fate of every harvest in their hands. Quirky detail? Some temple boards were made entirely of alabaster, their pale surfaces gleaming under oil lamps like frozen moonlight. It's hard to imagine a board like that being dragged out for a casual street game. This is divine-only territory. And here's the twist. Archaeologists have found game pieces in tombs that match those from temple sets, suggesting some priests borrowed the gods' equipment for personal use. No one's officially admitting it, of course. You shift slightly, trying not to draw attention, but one of the priests catches your eye and gives the faintest smile, as if to say, "Yes, this is unusual for you, but it's as normal as breathing for us." The game continues, the rhythm of throws and moves blending with the faint hum of bees circling the temple gardens. Every so often, the priest pauses to sprinkle a pinch of ground natron over the board, perhaps to purify it, perhaps to mark a transition between stages. When a piece lands on a particularly decorated square, a small Ankh symbol carved deep into the surface, the priest touches it lightly with 2 fingers, then bows his head. You get the feeling this is the house of rebirth space, the moment when the soul steps into the light after its trials. It's a slow match, unhurried, the kind of pace where you could close your eyes and still hear each movement in your mind. A throw of sticks, a piece gliding forward, a faint murmur of thanks to a god whose statue watches from the shadows. Somewhere beyond the courtyard, you hear the muffled rush of the Nile, like the eternal applause of the land itself. And then, just as quietly as it began, the game ends. The scarab piece rests on the final square, the house of happiness, and the priest touches it once more before lifting it from the board.
He places it gently in a small linen pouch, as if tucking it in for a long sleep. You realize you've been holding your breath. The air feels different now, lighter maybe, or just more still. The priest gathers the board in pieces, places them back on the tray, and carries them toward the inner sanctuary. You know you won't be following. Whatever happens next is for the gods alone. As you step out of the courtyard back into the sun's glare, you can't help but think of how the same game you saw in the market is now, in this setting, a sacred script, each move a prayer in motion. And maybe that's the beauty of Senet. It exists comfortably in both worlds, carrying laughter in one hand and reverence in the other.
The palace grounds are quieter than you expected. Not silent, never silent in a place this big, but the noise is muffled, as if the walls themselves know better than to disturb royalty mid-afternoon. You're escorted across a sunlit courtyard, past rows of potted date palms and lotus ponds, until you arrive at a shaded pavilion overlooking the gardens. There, under a canopy of linen, draped so loosely it ripples with each breeze, sits the pharaoh himself, or perhaps his son. It's hard to tell with the casual way he's leaning on one elbow. Before him rests a Senate board that looks like it could fund a small army. The inlay alone, gold, lapis lazuli, and tiny chips of mother of pearl, catch the light like it's been engineered to distract opponents. Across from him sits a princess, her braided hair threaded with beads, her smile the kind that says she has already beaten him 3 times today. The air between them hums with a mix of competition and familial familiarity. You catch the faintest smirk on the pharaoh's lips as he tosses the throw sticks. They land with a soft clack, and he moves one of his pieces, a golden falcon, 3 spaces forward. You're allowed to stand close enough to see the details. This board is slightly longer than the others you've seen, the edges trimmed with tiny hieroglyphic inscriptions. Some are prayers for victory. Others, according to the court scribe whispering beside you, are just jokes carved by an overly confident artisan. Historians still argue whether royal players actually followed the same rules as commoners, or whether the official palace rules were altered to keep the monarch in a more favorable position. Some scholars think the royal sets had extra safe squares subtly worked into the design, the kind of advantage no one would dare point out. Quirky detail? The princess's game pieces are all shaped like little lotus buds, each with a silver stem. It's said that in some noble households, each player would commission custom-shaped pieces to reflect their personality, or to double as jewelry. You imagine the chaos if someone dropped a solid gold pendant into the sand mid-game. The match moves slowly, each throw punctuated by the soft shuffle of attendants bringing refreshments, bowls of figs, dates stuffed with honey, and cool water scented faintly with mint. A musician in the corner plucks at a lute, filling the pauses between moves with a gentle, meandering melody. The princess makes a bold move, landing directly on one of the pharaoh's falcon pieces and sending it back toward the start. She hides her grin behind a sip of mint water, but her eyes sparkle with mischief. You can almost hear the unspoken, "Your move, father." The pharaoh responds with patience, sliding his remaining piece into a safe square and leaning back as if he has all the time in the world, which, given his position, he practically does. You realize that for him, this isn't just leisure. It's a subtle display of control, showing that he can lose a piece without losing composure. As you watch, it occurs to you how games like this could serve as more than entertainment in a royal setting. They're a way to teach strategic thinking, to gauge a potential heir's temperament, even to send quiet messages to the court. A careless move could be read as weakness, a bold win as a sign of future strength. The princess wins again. She doesn't gloat,
at least not openly, but the way she rises from her seat tells you she knows exactly how rare it is to take 4 matches in a row from her father. The pharaoh nods once, his expression unreadable, though you'd bet he's already planning his revenge in the next round. An attendant clears the board, each piece wrapped in a scrap of linen before being placed back into an ornate chest inlaid with ivory. You notice a faint groove along the edge of the chest's lid, worn smooth by decades of opening and closing. Even treasures get their own signs of age here. You're led away from the pavilion as the sun dips lower, the palace gardens glowing in gold and green. Behind you, the quiet clink of pieces being set up again drifts through the warm air. Maybe they're starting another game already. Or maybe, like the Nile itself, the royal household simply flows from one cycle of play to the next, unhurried and eternal.
The air inside the tomb is cool, almost damp, with the faint mineral tang of limestone wrapping around you like a shadow. You're standing in a chamber lit only by flickering oil lamps, their light dancing across walls painted in colors that have somehow survived 3 millennia. Every inch tells a story, rows of servants bearing offerings, gods with falcon heads and lion heads, the deceased standing in profile before Osiris. And there along the west wall is the scene that stops you. A man, clearly the tomb's owner, sits cross-legged before a Senet board. His opponent is no mortal, it's a goddess, her hand poised delicately over her next move. The game board between them is painted in loving detail, each square outlined in black, the pieces tiny but unmistakable. This isn't just art, it's a promise. In ancient Egyptian belief, playing Senet in the afterlife was more than a pastime. It was a trial. Win, and you pass safely into the field of reeds, the eternal paradise. Lose, and, well, historians still argue whether losing meant getting stuck in some spiritual holding pattern or facing something more ominous. Either way, the stakes in this painted match are higher than any street game in Thebes. A funerary priest kneels before the wall, reciting a passage from the Book of the Dead. The words flow like the river outside, steady and rhythmic, guiding the soul along the game's invisible path. On the floor before him rests a real Senet set, its wood polished to a dull glow, the squares inlaid with bone. A faint layer of dust softens its edges. It's been here for weeks, waiting for the final ritual. Quirky detail? Archaeologists have found actual Senet boards buried with the dead, sometimes tucked at the feet of the mummy, as though the journey ahead might get boring without entertainment. In one famous case, a board was carved directly into the coffin. Practical, if slightly morbid. You imagine the deceased, somewhere in the unseen realm, leaning forward over a board just like this, counting squares, weighing moves. Perhaps they are facing an ancestor, perhaps a god, or maybe even a cunning stranger whose job is to test every soul that passes. And you wonder, are the rules the same there? Or does the afterlife come with its own version, stacked in the god's favor? The priest rises and moves the top piece on the board, almost absent-mindedly. Maybe it's part of the ritual, maybe just habit. He sprinkles powdered natron over the set, then folds a square of linen to cover it. You hear the faint hiss of oil being poured into the lamp beside him, the scent of frankincense deepening in the still air. Your eyes drift back to the painted game on the wall. The goddess is frozen mid-gesture, her face calm but unreadable. The man opposite her seems almost confident. You can tell the artist wanted you to believe he had a chance. His hand rests near the final square, the house of happiness, just one lucky throw away from eternity's best seat. The silence in here is a different kind than in the palace or the temple. It's heavier, like the air itself knows this is no place for idle talk. Even your breath feels louder than it should. Somewhere deeper in the tomb, you think you hear a faint drop of water, a reminder that the earth above is still very much alive. It strikes you that in life, Senet might have been a way to kill an afternoon, to laugh with friends or gamble a handful of dates. But in death, it becomes a mirror, reflecting back everything you learned while living. Patience, cunning, the willingness to risk a move when the stakes are highest. The priest finishes his recitation, the words tapering into a whisper. He adjusts the linen over the board, pats it gently, then turns toward the passage leading out. The flicker of his lamp briefly illuminates the goddess's painted face one last time before plunging it back into shadow. You step backward into the narrow corridor, the air warming with each foot you put between yourself and the chamber. Outside, the sun is a blinding sheet of gold, the Nile glinting in the distance. Somewhere out there, children are playing Senet with pebbles and chalk lines. Somewhere else, a merchant is losing a wager over the same 30 squares. And down here, in the painted silence, a match waits forever to be finished.
You're back in the open air now, the tune's cool breath replaced by the dry warmth of late afternoon. The city stretches ahead, all sun-bleached walls and narrow alleys, and you wander toward the sound of voices bouncing off stone. Turning a corner, you step into a public square, the kind of place where everyone's business is everyone's entertainment. The ground here is a patchwork of limestone slabs, worn smooth by centuries of sandals. And there, scratched right into the stone, are game boards. Dozens of them, some neat and symmetrical, others lopsided, their lines wobbling as if drawn by someone trying to finish before the shop owner chased them away. A pair of older men sits cross-legged over one of the neater boards, their bare feet tucked in, their shadows stretching long in the low sun. Their pieces are mismatched, a few carved cones, some chipped bits of pottery, and what looks suspiciously like a goat's knuckle bone. They're deep in a match, muttering in that low, intent way that means neither is going to notice the rest of the world until the game's over. You wander closer, and one of them glances up briefly, gives a nod, then tosses the throw sticks. They clatter against the stone, bouncing slightly before settling. He grins, slides his piece forward, and leans back, satisfied. His opponent snorts and mutters something you can't quite catch, but it has the tone of, "You just got lucky." Historians still argue whether these public boards were a fixture of community life or just the result of bored shopkeepers passing slow hours. Some point to the sheer number of scratched-in boards as proof they were important social hubs. Others suggest they were like modern cafe tables, nice to have, but hardly sacred. Quirky detail. Some boards are carved into steps leading into buildings, so players could sit at different heights. Imagine trying to concentrate on a crucial move while someone walks over your playing surface to get inside. In a way, that interruption might be part of the charm, forcing you to keep your wits sharp amid chaos. Nearby, two boys crouch over a hastily chalked board, their pieces nothing more than lumps of dried mud. Every few moves, a stray chicken wanders between them, scattering the pieces. They groan, reset, and keep going. You can tell they've played this game so often the setup is second nature. You take a seat on a low wall to watch a different match unfold. Here the players are a merchant and a traveler, their board balanced on an overturned basket. The traveler speaks with an accent you can't place, and you get the feeling the rules might be shifting slightly to his disadvantage. Still, he seems to be enjoying himself, laughing even when a bad throw sends him backward. The smell of baking bread drifts from a nearby stall, and a girl carrying a basket of onions pauses to watch a move before hurrying on. It's a reminder that these games aren't confined to one class, one building, or even one set of pieces. They belong to anyone with enough time to sit and the imagination to play. As the sun drops lower, more people drift into the square. Some join games already in progress, others hover at the edges, offering commentary in the universal language of bystanders everywhere, unsolicited advice. One man points emphatically at a square, clearly convinced the player should take a different piece. The player ignores him, moves anyway, and a ripple of good-natured groans follows. You realize this is more than entertainment. It's glue. These boards, whether scratched in stone, drawn in chalk, or carved into wood, hold the community together. They give strangers an excuse to sit side by side, to talk, to share shade and gossip. And in the world where work is dictated by the whims of the Nile, these shared pauses are as valuable as the labor itself. A breeze kicks up, swirling dust over the boards. They barely notice. Their eyes are on the pieces, their hands on the sticks, their laughter rolling through the square as naturally as the river's current. You can feel yourself sinking into the rhythm of it. Throw, move, banter, repeat, until the sun dips below the rooftops and the oil lamps begin to glow. By the time you stand to leave, the matches show no sign of ending. Here, under the open sky, the game is endless, as much a part of the city's pulse as the calls of the market or the footsteps of those hurrying home. You take one last look at the scratched-in boards, their lines catching the lamplight, and you can't help but wonder how many more moves they'll see before the night is over.
Your next stop is a stall tucked into the corner of a narrow lane, where the merchant has laid out not one board, but a whole jumble of game implements. At first glance, it looks like a child's toy box exploded. Bits of carved wood, pebbles, knuckle bones, and bundles of short sticks tied neatly with twine. The sticks catch your eye first. They're no thicker than your little finger, each smoothed to a satin finish and painted on one side. These are the throw sticks, the heartbeat of games like Senet. Toss them, and the combination of painted and unpainted sides that land facing up determines your move. It's simple, but it carries that magical quality of randomness, like dice, except lighter, quieter, and less likely to roll under a goat. The merchant, a wiry man with an easy grin, hands you a set to try. You toss them into a shallow wooden tray. They clatter softly, one bouncing before coming to rest. He grins wider and points to an imaginary square on an imaginary board, the universal language for good throw. You can see why these sticks are preferred over heavier dice in open-air markets, less risk of losing them to a sudden gust or an uneven stone. Historians still argue whether these sticks evolved from tools used in divination or if they were purely for games from the start. The lines between game and ritual blur often in ancient Egypt. It's entirely possible that throwing sticks to decide a move was once a way to consult the gods about your luck that day. Then there are the knuckle bones, which in this case are literally what the name suggests. Small ankle bones from sheep or goats, polished until they shine. The merchant explains that some players use them like dice, each side representing a different number of moves. You pick one up, feeling its odd shape, the way it naturally lands on one of four faces. He says certain bones are considered luckier than others, especially if they come from an animal sacrificed at a festival. A quirky superstition, sure, but you suspect plenty of modern players still carry their own lucky tokens. On a low shelf sit jars filled with pebbles, smooth, rounded, and sorted by color. Some are painted with stripes or dots, others left plain.
These are the most humble of game pieces, perfect for those who can't afford carved ivory or imported faience. And they work just as well. After all, the board doesn't care what sits on it, only where it moves. You try tossing the sticks again, this time with more confidence. They land in a spread that makes the merchant chuckle approvingly. He slides a small carved piece towards you, a falcon, its wings folded tight, and gestures for you to move it along an invisible path. Even without a real board, you feel the little rush of decision-making, forward or sideways, aggressive or cautious. The market lane around you hums with life. A baker calls out the day's last loaves, a donkey brays at being jostled, and somewhere close, a woman's voice rises in laughter. Yet here, at this stall, the pace slows. You get the sense that buying a set of sticks or knucklebones isn't just a transaction, it's an invitation to hours, maybe years, of play. The merchant shows you a final oddity, a set of throw sticks carved from bone, each inlaid with tiny copper hieroglyphs. He says they belong to his grandfather, though you suspect that's part of the sales pitch. Still, they're beautiful, and when you hold them, they feel cool and solid in your palm, like they're holding on to the weight of all the games they've played. When you finally hand the pieces back, the merchant wraps them carefully in a scrap of linen before setting them aside. He doesn't pressure you to buy, just gives a nod, as though to say the experience of holding them is its own kind of ownership. You step away, the rhythm of stick tossing echoing faintly in your head. Throw, land, count, move. The sound is so ingrained now that you can almost hear it in the clatter of the market itself. Every voice, every footstep, another part of an endless invisible game.
You're standing at the docks now, the smell of tarred rope and drying fish filling the air. Boats sway gently against the current, their sails furled, their crews lounging on the decks after a long journey. Some of these vessels have traveled far beyond Egypt's borders, and you can see it in the cargo being unloaded. Strange jars, unfamiliar fruits, woven baskets with patterns unlike anything from the Nile Valley. At the end of one dock, a group of sailors has gathered around a board. This one is a little different. Its squares are decorated in a style you haven't seen before, the edges lined with geometric designs that remind you of pottery from the Levant. The pieces, too, are unusual. Small discs of painted clay, their surfaces worn smooth by many hands. The man sitting cross-legged at the far side of the board notices your interest. He tells you, in a mix of Egyptian and accented words, that this is a game from across the water, brought back by traders who sailed east to Byblos and beyond. He claims the locals there play by slightly different rules, though whether that's true or just a sailor's embellishment is hard to say. Historians still argue about how much Egyptian games influenced foreign ones and vice versa. Some believe Senet inspired racetrack games in the Near East. Others suggest Egypt adopted and adapted older designs from Mesopotamia or the Levant. The archaeological record is like a half-finished game. Plenty of pieces, but not enough to see the whole strategy. A quirky detail emerges when one of the sailors explains their dockside rule. On long voyages, they adjust the board to have fewer squares, speeding up matches so they can play between shifts without losing daylight. They even scratch makeshift boards right into the ship's deck planks, a practice that horrifies shipwrights but keeps boredom at bay during calm days at sea. The men invite you to join around. You sit cross-legged on the dock, the wooden boards warm beneath you from the sun. The pieces clink softly as they move, and every time the throw sticks hit the board, gulls startle from nearby posts. You learn quickly that these sailors play with more banter than reverence.
mocking bad throws, exaggerating their own skill, occasionally accusing the wind of conspiring against them. A small boy, no older than 10, hovers nearby with a basket of dates. He watches every move like a student studying a master, his lips silently counting spaces. One of the sailors tosses him a piece of dried fish for payment for his running commentary. As the match goes on, you realize these imported games have a kind of double life here. In the port, they're a novelty, a conversation starter with foreign crews. But inland, they often blend so seamlessly into Egyptian play that their foreign origins vanish within a generation. Maybe a board from Cyprus becomes a wedding gift in Memphis. Maybe a set of Syrian throw sticks ends up buried in a nobleman's tomb. The breeze picks up, carrying the smell of the sea and a faint tang of resin from a newly patched hull. The sailors are in good spirits. Someone's winning, though you're not sure who because they keep switching pieces when they think no one's looking. You suspect this is less about who reaches the last square and more about filling the waiting hours before the tide turns. When the game ends, the winner pumps his fists and shouts something in his own language that makes the others laugh. The board is packed away into a canvas bag, the pieces rattling like distant rain. As you stand to leave, you glance back and see them starting another match already, this time with the boy as a player. You walk away down the dock, the voices fading into the creak of mooring ropes and the slap of water against hulls. The Nile may be Egypt's spine, but here at its mouth you can feel the pulse of the wider world, traders, sailors, and their games drifting in with the tide.
The marketplace is lively today, a swirl of voices, bartering hands, and the clink of pottery lids being lifted for inspection. You're making your way between stalls when a sudden cheer rises from a shaded corner. You follow the sound and find a knot of people gathered around a Senet board balanced on 2 crates. The air smells of warm bread and roasted chickpeas, but here the main currency is excitement. 2 men are playing with absolute focus, their eyes locked on the board like generals planning the final push of a campaign. One is a merchant with a belly shaped by too many feasts. The other is a wiry farmer, his skin darkened from long days in the sun. Between them, resting casually on the edge of the board, is the prize, a small basket of grain. Not much in the grand scheme, but enough to bake a few good loaves. You edge closer, and the tension in the crowd is almost physical. A woman behind you murmurs odds to a friend, and you realize people aren't betting not just in grain, but in dates, bits of copper, and even a carved bone needle. Historians still argue how widespread gambling really was in ancient Egypt. Officially, some temples frowned upon it, especially if the wagers involved items needed for household survival. Yet there's evidence in graffiti and ostraka, those broken pottery shards used for writing, suggesting that betting on games was as common as swapping market gossip. The merchant throws the sticks, 2 flat sides up, 3 rounded, and his piece advances into what looks like a safe square. The crowd murmurs approval. Then the farmer takes his turn, and with an easy flick, lands directly on the merchant's piece, sending it back toward the start. The crowd erupts into cheers, a couple of side bets changing hands immediately. Quirky detail? In some wagers, instead of trading goods outright, the winner would claim a kind of social debt that had to be repaid in favors. Help during harvest, carrying water from the well, or even babysitting goats. It kept the game's stakes high, but avoided leaving a neighbor destitute over a bad throw. The farmer's victory lap is short-lived. On his next turn, he hits a house of water square and is washed backwards several spaces. The merchant grins, tapping the basket of grain like he's already tasting it. Around you, the onlookers groan or laugh depending on where they've placed their own bets. The match stretches on, each reversal sparking new wages.
You see one man trade a pair of sandals for the chance to bet on the next throw. Another woman offers a jug of beer, confident her chosen player will pull through. It's not a noisy, drunken kind of betting. It's woven into the rhythm of the market, punctuated by greetings and sales as people duck in and out of the crowd. Finally, the farmer lands his last piece in the house of happiness. The crowd claps, and someone hands him the basket of grain. He hefts it with a small, satisfied smile, but you notice him splitting it, half to take home, half given back to the merchant. Maybe it's goodwill, maybe it's tradition, maybe it's just smart politics in a town where you see the same faces every day. As the crowd disperses, another pair sits down at the crates, eager to start their own game. A fresh basket of onions appears on the board's edge. You hear the sticks clatter once more, and the cycle begins again. Throw, move, wager, cheer. Walking away, you catch yourself thinking about how even here, in a society that builds monuments to last forever, people still chase the fleeting thrill of a lucky throw. And maybe that's the real magic of these games, the way they balance chance and skill, pulling strangers together for just long enough to see who fortune favors this time.
The morning light is softer today, spilling over rooftops and filtering down into a school courtyard. It's not a grand space, just a square of packed earth bordered by mud brick walls, but it's alive with movement. Young boys in simple linen tunics sit in small groups, some scratching hieroglyphs onto shards of pottery, others reciting lessons in sing-song voices. And off to one side, a cluster of children is huddled around a game board. It's smaller than the ones you've seen in the marketplace, carved into a scrap of wood no bigger than a writing tablet. The pieces are crude, smooth river pebbles in 2 colors, but the energy around it is pure intensity. One boy tosses a set of tiny sticks into a shallow bowl, and they clatter like miniature drum beats. His opponent watches closely, already gripping her pebble piece between 2 fingers, ready to pounce. A teacher in a worn linen robe strolls by, pretending not to notice the game. Historians still argue whether board games in schools were encouraged as tools for teaching strategy or tolerated simply because they kept restless students occupied. Some surviving records hint at educators using Senet to teach counting and planning, while others warn against letting idle play distract from the serious business of learning. Quirky detail? Miniature boards like this were sometimes carved onto the backs of writing slates. That way, a student could flip the slate over and play during breaks, or, if they were bold, sneak in a quick move during a particularly dull grammar lesson. You can imagine the mix of terror and glee if the teacher caught them mid-throw. The game here is fast-paced. Children don't linger over strategy the way adults do. They're quick to throw, quick to move, quick to celebrate. A girl in the group lets out a triumphant shout as she sends her friend's piece back to the start. The friend groans, flops backward dramatically, and the whole group bursts into laughter. One boy, too young to fully understand the rules, is given the important job of stick catcher, retrieving them after each throw and handing them back with great ceremony. He beams with pride, even though sometimes he hands over the wrong sticks entirely. The older players gently correct him, keeping the game rolling without losing the easy rhythm. The teacher finally wanders over, his hands clasped behind his back. He watches a few moves, then surprises everyone by kneeling down and joining in. His throws are deliberate, and though he pretends not to be trying, you can tell he's guiding the game toward a teachable moment. Within minutes, he's explaining how one player could have avoided being sent back by taking a different route, a little lesson in foresight disguised as fun. It's strange how quickly the noise of the courtyard fades for you. Your focus pulled into the small square of wood on the ground. The voices of the other students reciting lessons become a background hum, like wind through reeds. The children lean closer, their heads nearly touching, the board a shared anchor in the dusty space between them. When the game ends, the winner's smile is wide and unguarded, and the loser is already setting up for a rematch. There's no grain to win, no grand stakes, just the pure joy of trying again. In that way, it feels closer to the heart of why people play at all. As you leave the courtyard, you glance back and see the teacher standing now, the children huddled in a new group around him. The board lies forgotten in the dust, but you know it will be back in play before the day is over. Just like the letters they're learning, the game is something they'll carry with them into adulthood. Its squares and throws etched into their memory as deeply as the Nile's seasons.
The wind off the Nile feels different today, drier, sharper, as though carrying whispers from far upriver. You're walking through a quieter quarter of the city now, past shuttered shops and shuttered faces. The market still runs, the fields still green where the flood has receded, but there's an undercurrent in the air, talk of new rulers, shifting alliances, taxes changing hands. You notice it first in the absence. In the marketplace where Senet boards once sat ready for play, the stones are bare. The chalk lines have been scrubbed clean from the public steps. The few boards you do see are tucked discreetly indoors, their owners leaning close as they play with the quiet focus of people who don't want to draw attention. Historians still argue over why Senet faded from daily life in Egypt. Some point to foreign influence, new rulers bringing their own games, their own pastimes, and slowly replacing the old. Others suggest the game's religious overtones became less appealing as beliefs shifted, especially during periods when foreign gods or new political orders took hold. Whatever the cause, it's clear the game's dominance began to wane. Quirky detail? In some of the latest known boards, the religious symbols that once marked certain squares have been replaced with purely decorative patterns. Lotus flowers, geometric borders. It's as if the makers were consciously stripping the game of its sacred weight, turning it into just a pleasant diversion. You step into a tavern tucked off a side street. Inside, a handful of men sit around a battered table. The Senet board worn so smooth, the grooves are barely visible. The game is lively enough, but there's a watchfulness to it. One player glances at the door whenever footsteps pass outside. It's not forbidden exactly, but the mood has shifted. Outside, a group of teenagers are clustered around a different board game altogether, one you don't recognize. The pieces are flat discs, the throws replaced with something like small carved dice. They're laughing, jostling, the same energy you saw with Senet a few streets over, but the board's layout is foreign. Perhaps this is how it happens, not with a sudden ban, but with gradual replacement, old boards gathering dust while the new ones fill the squares. You pass a craftsman's stall where an unfinished board lies under a cloth. He pulls the cover back when he sees you looking, but there's a hesitation in the gesture. The design is beautiful, ivory inlay, rich dark wood, but he shrugs when you ask if it's for sale. He says, maybe for the right buyer, but not many ask these days. His voice has the tone of someone who knows the tradition is slipping, but doesn't yet know if it will be gone for good. Further along, you find an abandoned courtyard, where a faded game grid is carved directly into a stone bench. Dust fills the grooves now. You run your fingers over them, imagining the hands that played here, the laughter that once filled this space. You can almost hear it until the wind changes, carrying away the sound and leaving only the hollow quiet. You wonder if those who played in these last years of Senet's popularity realized they were part of an ending. Did they sense the tide turning, the way the river's flood sometimes comes later than expected? Or were they too absorbed in the throw of sticks, the slow crawl of pieces toward victory, to notice the game was becoming a relic in real time? The sun dips lower, casting long shadows that stretch across the empty squares of the courtyard bench. You take one last look before stepping back into the street, feeling the strange weight of something both present and gone, alive in memory, but fading in the daylight.
The air smells faintly of coffee and dust, the kind of scent you find in museum storerooms. You're standing in a climate-controlled chamber, far from the Nile now, centuries later, watching two archaeologists sit cross-legged on the floor. Between them, on a padded mat, is a replica Senet board, painstakingly reconstructed from fragments found in a royal tomb. The board is a beauty, polished wood inlaid with ivory, each square etched with the same mysterious symbols you saw in temple carvings. The pieces are reproductions too, modeled after originals that are too fragile to touch. One set is shaped like squat cones, the other slender spools. The archaeologists are not just admiring them, they're playing. You listen as they toss modern replicas of throw sticks. They land with a dry clack, and one archaeologist advances her piece. Her opponent immediately challenges the move, citing the 1904 rule interpretation, whatever that means. Historians still argue about the rules, and watching this, you understand why. Surviving boards don't come with instruction manuals. Instead, scholars have pieced together possibilities from paintings, inscriptions, and the occasional ancient gripe carved into a wall about someone cheating at the game of passing. One quirky detail? Some researchers have found boards where the final squares are ladled with terms like House of Beauty or House of Three Truths, but their exact functions remain debated. In this match, the archaeologists can't even agree whether landing on House of Water sends you back 3 spaces or to the very start. The discussion gets so animated that you're half convinced they've forgotten the actual goal is to finish the game. You kneel beside the mat, and one of them hands you a set of sticks. You toss them, the movement instinctive now after all the boards you've seen. She nods approvingly, then tells you to move a piece 2 squares forward. Her colleague immediately raises an eyebrow. Technically, he says, some reconstructions would count that as 3. Their banter is friendly, but you can feel the weight of their work in it. Every move is a kind of experiment, a tiny act of time travel, trying to recapture a rhythm that hasn't been truly alive for over 2,000 years. On a nearby table, the real artifacts sit under glass, splintered boards, chipped pieces, sticks worn thin from countless throws. Their surfaces are cracked and dulled, but you can still see the human touch in them. The grooves where fingers rested, the faded traces of painted lines. The archaeologists glance at them often, as if hoping for a sudden revelation. You're reminded that the game's mystery is part of its endurance. If every rule were known, maybe Senet would just be another old pastime, quaint but complete. Instead, its half-understood nature invites each generation to fill in the blanks, to imagine the laughter, the wagers, the divine rituals. It's a board that never quite stops playing back. The match between the archaeologists comes to a predictably inconclusive end. One claims victory, the other insists the rules don't allow it. They laugh, record a few notes in a battered notebook, and carefully return the pieces to their box. The replica board goes back onto a shelf, labeled with a neat tag, Senet Reconstruction, for demonstration only. As you step out of the room, the controlled chill gives way to the warm air outside. The modern world hums just beyond the museum walls, but your mind is still with the game, on the dock in the sun, in the shadow of a temple, scratched into a street corner slab. The archaeologist may never settle their debates, but maybe that's the point. Senet was never just about the finish, it was always about the moves along the way.
The Nile is calm tonight, the water dark and heavy under the starlight. You're sitting on a low wooden boat, its deck still warm from the day's sun. The slow push of the current makes the vessel sway gently, a motion that feels almost like breathing. Around you, the river hums, frogs calling from the reeds, the occasional splash of a fish breaking the surface, the faint rustle of palm fronds along the banks. On the plank before you rests a Senet board. Not an ancient original, not a museum replica, but a hand-carved copy from a market stall in Thebes. The squares are painted in alternating shades of ochre and cream, the pieces simple cones of dark and light wood. It's not precious enough to make you nervous, but it's beautiful in its own way, meant for playing, not displaying. Across from you sits your opponent, a fisherman whose skin smells faintly of the river and sun-baked nets. He grins as he tosses the throw sticks into a shallow bowl. They land with a muted clack, and he moves one of his dark cones forward. You match him, tossing the sticks and sliding your piece along the neat row of squares. There's no rush here. The match drifts along as slowly as the current, each move punctuated by sips of a clay cup of date-sweetened beer. Sometimes you talk about the wind, about the chances of rain, but often you just listen. Out here, the silence isn't empty. It's thick with the river's presence, with the distant sounds of life carrying across the water. Historians still argue whether this kind of riverside leisure was common or reserved for certain classes. There's little evidence in the written record, but you suspect people have always found excuses to mix work and pleasure. If you spend your life on the water, why wouldn't you bring a board along for the slow hours between fishing spots? Quirky detail? Some old boards recovered near river settlements show water damage along the edges, as if they were set down on damp planks or even balanced across barrels during play. You glance at yours now, catching a bead of condensation from your cup rolling toward the nearest square. Maybe a few water stands would just make it look more authentic. The fisherman laughs when you send one of his pieces back to the start. He responds by landing on yours a few turns later, and you both agree the revenge was inevitable. It's an easy rhythm. Throw, move, tease, repeat, blending into the steady slap of water against the hull. Above, the stars are bright enough to reflect in the river, tiny double constellations trembling with each ripple. You find yourself slowing your moves just to watch them, the fisherman leaning back to do the same. Neither of you is in any hurry to finish. This isn't a game for victory. It's a game for company, for stretching out the night until the air cools and the first hints of dawn touch the horizon. When at last your final piece reaches the house of happiness, you don't feel like you've won anything. The fisherman just nods, starts setting the pieces back to their starting squares, and offers you another drink. The match will begin again soon, and maybe another after that. Out here, the board is as much a part of the boat as the oars or the nets. It travels with the river, unending. The moon dips lower, the current tugs a little harder, and somewhere upriver the same game is being played in a courtyard, on a temple step, or in the glow of an oil lamp. The boards may differ, the rules may shift, but the slow dance of chance and choice remains. And as you lean back, the stars above and below you, the river feels like the biggest game board of all, one that no one ever truly finishes.
The boat rocks gently.
a cradle on the river's dark surface. Your hands rest loosely in your lap now, the game set aside, the pieces quiet in their bag. The fisherman stretches out, his eyes half closed, and the two of you sit in a silence so soft it feels like a blanket. The night air has cooled, carrying the faint scent of lotus from somewhere along the bank. You breathe it in slowly, letting it linger, letting it settle. The voices from distant boats are little more than murmurs, the kind that blur into the sound of the water until you can't tell them apart. Every now and then, the boat drifts just enough to change the angle of the stars. You watch them shift, patient and unhurried, their light traveling across centuries to meet you here. Somewhere, the memory of the day's games is still in your hands. The smooth feel of the pieces, the soft clatter of the sticks, but it's fading now, like ripples flattening into still water. Your breathing matches the river's rhythm. In as the current presses gently against the hull, out as the boat sways back. The edges of the world feel soft here, like the boundaries between water and sky are dissolving. It's easy to imagine the same peace in every game that's ever been played along these banks. The laughter, the wagers, the quiet focus, all settling into the same stillness once the last move is made. You close your eyes. The stars are still there behind your lids, the river still carrying you forward, and the night still stretching wide and deep around you. The game will wait, the river will hold you, and the world will keep its gentle pace until morning.